lots of big developments in Ukraine over the last couple of days. Of course, we saw that the Ukrainians have been withdrawing from major strategic towns in the east, but there are new assessments coming out of Washington with deep fears about what the future looks like in this prolonged, a war of attrition, both a wearing down of the Russian side and of the Ukrainian side. Actually, some reporting coming out this morning, the Russians may have lost up to 25,000 troops so far, killed in action of the initial invasion force of 300,000. Man, that's that's
huge.
Big, yeah. And that's almost 10% of the troops who have been killed in action, not to mention wounded, because right now they're going all over the country trying to, it's a secret mobilization is what people are calling it, because they're trying to do kind of a secret recruiting drive in order to replenish the number of troops. I talked previously about how Russia has a tremendous amount of conscripts available, tens of millions of people, if they wanted to ever do some sort of full-scale mobilization. So it's always important to remember the manpower is definitely on their side, if they want it to be, but they're constrained a little bit politically right now. In terms of what's being leaked out, this is probably the single most concerning one that I saw. Let's throw this up there on the screen, which is that you guys might have seen that recent barbaric missile strike by Russia on a civilian shopping mall. Now, what people are pointing to is that actually that missile strike may actually suggest Moscow is running very low on precision weaponry, and that increasingly is turning to the less sophisticated armaments which could hit unintended targets, going back 30, 40 years in the history of warfare. Well, the problem with that is that that potentially could lead to an unintentional strike across the border in Poland or Romania.
Yikes.
Remember, Russia is not just hitting targets in Kyiv or in eastern Ukraine. They are targeting specifically armament shipments from the West. So, for example, Lviv, which is right there on the border with Poland, if just one missile goes the wrong way because it's not guided properly, because the commander doesn't know what he's doing, because whoever this conscript is who shoots it doesn't know, it doesn't calibrate it exactly correctly, it could go off course by 10 miles, and now we're in a whole other situation. This increasingly is also risky as Russia is going to continue to target Western armament shipments specifically, as they were trying to do, or supposedly said they were trying to do so in Kyiv in the first place, and even in the most eastern parts, or in the western parts of the country. So that's very, very concerning. You found this quote, Krystal, in the New York Times story from a Ukrainian as well, who are getting really disillusioned right now with the efforts.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about, what do the Ukrainians want? And they want to continue fighting, so we have to back them up. But there are some signs that at least some Ukrainians, as the reality of this conflict seeps in, and especially those who are in the hardest hit conflict zones in the eastern part of the state, they are having regrets that there were not more serious negotiations to avoid this entire disaster. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. They have a quote from one resident in that region who says outright, "We should have negotiated. We should have made concessions on both sides because it won't lead to anything good. We have to agree somehow, but we have to let there be big financial losses or some other international relations, but we must find an agreement. We live in the 21st century." And, Saagar, to the point about the shopping mall and the sort of possibility of unintentional bombings of NATO allies and how terrifying that is, and what what that could ultimately lead to based on our Article 5 obligations there. I think it's very easy as a story like this drags on, as a horrific, brutal, bloody, murderous conflict like this drags on, as we're very insulated from it here in the West, to sort of forget about the risks and just how dangerous and fraught a situation it is, and how quickly it could escalate, how quickly something could happen that could cause this thing to spin out of control in a direction that no one, not here, not in Europe, not anywhere, wants it to ultimately go in. So it is really important that we always continue to remember just how close to the edge we are here, and how close we are to a direct conflict with another nuclear superpower. And so, this individual who they quote in the eastern part of Ukraine saying, listen, we should have negotiated, we should have tried to avoid this. I think this is the hard reality that's going to increasingly be setting in, not only for Ukrainians, but for, people here in the US as well, because for a war to go on and on and on, a horrible grinding stalemate with these indiscriminate weapons that are increasingly hitting civilians, this is a horror. This is a horror for the people of Ukraine, for this war to basically last indefinitely, which continues to effectively be, you know, the U.S. and our UK allies. That continues to be our position.
Yeah, and there's actually a former general, brigadier general, wrote a very interesting piece in the the Wall Street Journal. Let's throw this up there on the screen. He was actually a assistant secretary of state also under the Obama administration. What they point to, and what he points to here, is that the West Ukraine strategy will mean a prolonged and a bloody stalemate. NATO is committed to support for, quote, as long as it takes, not to win, only to stave off Russian victory. And so what they're pointing to in this is that recent changes in Russian operations suggest they are making a transition from maneuver war to artillery war, no longer relying on modern-day lightning strikes. The Ukrainians are using recently arrived NATO systems with far more range and precision targets, while the Russians are taking a tactical pause after their recent victory in Severodonetsk. However, rather than win through this maneuver, the goal is now to win through exhaustion. Both Mr. Putin and President Zelensky seek to wear the other side down, and the NATO promise of indefinite resupply to offset the Russian artillery advantage will likely result in an even more static front line. So what does that mean? More grinding up against each other. It's called, Dan Carlin famously referred to it as the meat grinder in his Blueprint for Armageddon World War I podcast. This is very analogous, obviously not the same in terms of the casualties or the horror, but 1/10 of that is still horrific and still a lot of casualties. Yeah. So this is important also, is to then see, okay, is it working? Is our strategy grinding the Russians down? Are they anywhere close to giving up? Now, should you believe Putin all the time? And is he a bullshit artist in his own right? Absolutely. But let's throw this up there on the screen. Here's what he's telling the Russian people. He says, Russia has barely started its action. He says, quote, it is a tragedy for the Ukrainian people, but it looks like it's heading in that direction. Everybody should know that, largely speaking, we have not even started yet anything in earnest. He declared Russia remains steady and ready to sit down for talks to end the fighting, adding that those who refuse to do so should know that the longer it lasts, the more difficult it will be for them to make a deal with us. We are hearing that they want to defeat us on the battlefield. Putin says, he scoffs, let them try. So he is showing you very clearly he doesn't give, he doesn't care about the strategy. Now, of course, his country is suffering. They've got an 8% or so reduction, but they have a tremendous amount of cards that they can play right now. I did my monologue last week on July 7th about the upcoming shutdown of the Nord Stream pipeline. That pipeline officially shut down today, actually. Wow. And just to show you that Western resolve isn't what it is, one of the reasons that they had been trouble with that, the Russians said that one of the reasons that gas had already been shut by almost 60% to Germany is, hey, we can't get some of these turbines which we ordered from Canada. And Germany has put tremendous amount of pressure, which the Canadians have just acceded to actually ship those turbines to Russia to keep the gas flow from Russia to Germany. So Germany is like, listen, we need the gas. They're basically going to do anything. That effectively means by giving them that wind turbine or that gas turbine, they are basically committing to hundreds of billions of dollars more to the Russian regime at a time when gas is sky high. So on the one hand, they're shipping weapons to Ukraine, NATO is. On the other hand, the centerpiece of the European continent's NATO power is sending hundreds of billions of euros a month over to Russia to finance them, on top of, exactly as we predicted, the Biden administration came out over the weekend with their so-called cap on Russian oil. Right. And guess what? The Indians were like, yeah, we're good. We're not gonna do that. So like, okay. Cool. So it didn't work. The Indians were like, we're just gonna keep buying it at the current rate because we're actually making a killing by not just buying it for us, but selling it back to you.
Yeah, that's the one.
So why would we cap the price when we're making billions of dollars a year and our people are actually getting cheap oil when the rest of the world is suffering? The Chinese also are not committing to do it. You know why? Because they actually have a geopolitical commitment to supporting Russia, and also they also like cheap gas like everybody else. So the scheme on oil failed. The gas scheme is completely failing. If anything, Europe is becoming even more reliant on Russian gas. They're like begging and pleading the Russians not to cut them off. So the resolve of the West is not doing so hot right now at this time.
Yeah, and we're going to talk in the next block about how, this conflict has also completely upended Biden's stated priorities in foreign policy with regards to Saudi Arabia, too, and has, forced their hand on that issue. It's certainly exacerbating the climate crisis. And by the way, as Saagar is pointing out, and as we've pointed out many times, you're not having the effect you wanted to have in terms of like bleeding the Russian regime, Putin's regime dry. They are making bank and they're, holding out just fine. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.